you know.
It must have been fascinating being that young, and you're at the Colonel's house. Okay, you may not have known too much about the Colonel then, but you're witnessing history in the making, Elvis history. And I'd imagine at that time there were a lot of deals happening. There was a lot of things happening with the Colonel then, which were going to shape Elvis's career. Can you remember sort of the first thing that you saw that you thought, wow, this is sort of quite life-changing. This is something that I'm privy to, which a kid of my age really wouldn't be here in the sort of middle of show business.
You know what? I was certainly not an executive. I was the Colonel's. He was somewhat like my dad, even though my dad was still alive. And unintentionally, I would sit with the Colonel, and I'd always answer the phone. And I hear him making major movie deals. At those early years when I was a teenager, Elvis wasn't on the road, he was making movies. And the Colonel negotiating for the perks in a movie was more fun than the movie. They got the money. The money was taken care of immediately, how much money Elvis was going to get. And then it was long negotiations about lunches in the studio commissary. That would be a major thing. Everything the Colonel did, all meetings were around breakfast meetings, lunch meetings, dinner meetings. There was no other time. It was just travel to the next meeting for lunch. And I would hear all the detail and all the problems, you know, from the Colonel's side. I wasn't on the phone, but I could always hear I was sitting next to the Colonel, and I answered the phone. I knew what he was talking about. And those were, and Elvis was coming down pretty much every weekend. He'd come to Palm Springs, and he'd leased a house 3 blocks from the Colonel. And then he found out that probably wasn't a good idea. And then he bought a house about half a mile away on Chino Canyon Drive. And I bought that house later, but that's another whole story.
So at the time of you working there, what were your sort of first jobs? Because we hear stories from people. We've had sort of Ed Bonger, who's been to our festivals before, and he tells the story, of course, when he first started working for the Colonel, he got sort of very menial jobs to do, and it was only then that he sort of built himself up. What were your sort of first roles working for the Colonel? The Colonel was trying to keep me busy. And Elvis did a lot too, really, really did a lot. They would think up things for me to do. I was redoing air conditioning that didn't need to be rebuilt. You know, I was a kid. I was 16, 17 years old by then. And they would both compete to see how busy they could keep me. And the truth was they were really being kind. Both of them would find things for me to do just because they know I needed the money. And it was getting crazy. I was building a sauna for Elvis, a jacuzzi, which turned out to be not a great thing in his life later, but we won't talk about that. Elvis had me build a room for him as I got older, an entire wing of his house. And we bought the house from the McDonald family that owned McDonald's restaurants, Dorothy McDonald. So Elvis decided that he wanted me to build a room on the house. So I said, great, perfect. So he tells me what he wants from the room. He goes off on tour, and he's gone maybe 3 or 4 months. Well, I've got the room framed. I have the foundation poured. I have the electric is in. And he wanted a new bedroom at the end of the wing of that house, but he didn't want a door into his new bedroom. You had to walk outside by the pool to get into his bedroom. Okay, so I built the room. I get the Spanish tiles on the roof, but I haven't sheetrocked it in. Elvis comes up, so I go up to the house, and we'll walk out by the patio, and we're going to look at this new room. And Elvis says, "Oh, this is great. You're doing great work, Greg. This is good. This is good." I got an idea. I go, "What's that, Elvis?" And he says, "Move it." I said, "Move the room?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "I think people can see me up here if the room is out symmetrical to the other side of the house." He said, I want you to take the room, this is about 2,400 square feet, take this room and move it. I couldn't believe my ears, and I also knew how angry Vernon was going to be at me, because he didn't want me to spend any extra money, ever. So I tore that room down. If you ever go to Chino Canyon, you look out the back wall, you see a bunch of concrete chunks down at the bottom. That's where we had to chip up the concrete, move the whole room, rebuild it. Then he loved it. Now he thought it was great. He only did that, I'm sure, to give me something to do. And he was just that generous, and he was just that funny. Because I think he walked back in and told the guys, I told him to move it.
Now, during that time as well, did you come face to face with other celebrities? Were people coming in and out of Palm Springs for the Colonel's meetings? Were you sort of exposed to other people who were big names in show business at that time?
Quite a bit. The Colonel and I would go into Los Angeles like on Monday and come back on Thursday. Well, even though they were in town all the time, they would make young producers and young people trying to have meetings with them come to Palm Springs, California on the weekend, and come because Abe Lasvogel, who most people don't really know, Abe Lasvogel was Elvis's agent from day one, but from William Morris Agency. So Abe would come down on Fridays, and the Colonel and I would go back to Palm Springs on Thursdays, but they'd schedule all their meetings in the steam room at the Spa Hotel. So they'd sit up there and smoking cigars in the steam room, and the young guys that had a movie pitch or a song pitch would have to come in there. Well, of course, they could stay in that steam room for a day. Any ordinary human could only stay in there about 20 minutes because they were pouring the water on the rocks. It was crazy. So that's how they kept their pitches short. So they'd hear just enough until the guy had to run out of the room. And actually, the first one I ever saw in that room was Jerry Weintraub. Jerry Weintraub had to go in, became a famous movie producer. He started in that steam room talking to Elvis and the Colonel in a blind of smoke.
Well, that's quite a start for him, because of course Jerry went on to do Miramax and produce so many big mainstream films as well.
Oh, sure. Jerry Weintraub he was a good guy. He was had a lot of great success. You know, a lot of great success. The Colonel talked him into doing a movie with a singer named George Strait. The Colonel says this guy's going to be a big country star, and he talked Jerry into doing the movie Pure Country. And then they had the Colonel's dancing chicken story in the movie. If you ever saw Pure Country, they had the dancing chicken story. But he had a lot of influence. And Jerry Weintraub went on to do Oceans 11 and 12 and 13 and 14, and big success.
Yeah, big guy in Hollywood. Now, you were saying that at the time you weren't really doing much stalking because of traveling between Palm Springs and back doing the tent, but you must have had friends kind of your own age around about that time. I mean, how did you explain that to them? How did you explain, I'm hanging out with Elvis and Colonel Tom Parker?
It was odd growing up, obviously, because I went from one night taking up a collection for the preacher, and then a week later, I'm standing in the lobby with Colonel Parker selling I Hate Elvis buttons. And of course, the Colonel sold I Love Elvis buttons, and I sold more buttons for the boys for I Hate Elvis buttons. And it was kind of easy, and this was just a movie premiere thing. It really wasn't a concert night. But of course, I don't know if you've ever seen those, but they're at Graceland, the I Hate Elvis buttons. I sold most of those.
So, when was it that you started working almost full-time for them? You were still going back and forth to do the other job, but when did you start working full-time for the Colonel and Elvis?
You know, when you were around the Colonel, it didn't matter what else you were doing, whether it was school or your life or getting married. You were in the Colonel's army, and it was day and night. The Colonel was One day my wife is at our home in Palm Springs, and the phone man comes and knocks on the door. And she answers the door, and she says, is this where Greg McDonald lives? And she says, yes, that's my husband. He says, well, will you show me what side of the bed your husband sleeps on? And this is the phone man. Okay. She said, Colonel Parker sent me. So the Colonel had installed next to my bed, and the guys know this very well, Charlie and Dick, a red phone. So right next to my side of the bed, there was a red phone, and there was no dial on it, and I didn't know the phone number. So if that phone rang, it was the Colonel or Elvis's house. And they used to get mad because sometimes I wouldn't answer the phone. Believe it or not, I didn't want to see him day and night. Maybe everybody else did, and I loved him. But that phone would ring, and if you didn't answer the phone, the Colonel would drive down and show up at the door. So Elvis knew this from early on, So the phone would ring, and one night the phone rings in the middle of the night, and it was either Dick or Joe Esposito called me and said, Elvis wants to see you. Well, okay, it's just so odd that I was being summoned up to the house. I thought, this is kind of cool. I don't know how old I was, maybe 20 years old. Well, I get up there, and nothing's really happening. All the guys are there, and Elvis is off in his bedroom, probably sleeping, middle of the night. And one at a time, the guys started disappearing, including Dick. And I didn't get it. I'm sitting there waiting. I didn't know what I was up there for. And this was the beginning of years and years of this. And they'd all disappear. I'd look around, and they're all gone, and I'm sitting there in the living room. Well, what I didn't know, I was the designated babysitter. They couldn't leave Elvis alone at the house. So he was off asleep or whatever he was doing. They all go disappear. And I'm sitting in the living room, and Elvis comes out about 4 hours later, wanders down the hall. We talk till daylight, till they show back up. So I figured out what the game was after they'd done that about 80 times. So, the good part of that is I wasn't so much a part of Elvis's business career. I knew him in Palm Springs. I knew him because I'd spend the whole night just he and I talking and watching a lot of crazy television and watching a lot of crazy preachers on television, because he loved to do that too. And I got to know him in a strange, him and I sitting on a couch watching television, and I talked to him for years and years. I was the designated babysitter. So.
You're not a bad person to babysit.
It was great.
Now, talk about the Colonel again. We see the Colonel as being this kind of full-on business-type character. It's business all the way, money all the time. Did you ever see a lighter side to the Colonel? Did he ever, you were around him a lot in private, did he ever let his guard down? Was he a fun character? Did he enjoy having a laugh and relaxing?
People, I'm sort of a big defender of the Colonel, which is not very popular. And I knew him probably as good as anyone, because Colonel didn't drive. I would drive into Los Angeles and back, and I would drive him to Las Vegas, and we spent a lot of time together. The Colonel was one of the funniest people you ever met. He had this persona of being this tough Dutchman guy, but alone, it was pretty much a joke. People don't understand how lighthearted and how many gags he pulled on us, and he was a great practical joker. And I loved Elvis like he was my older brother, because he was really kind to me. He did a lot of nice things for me and my family, because I got a family. I know this is sacrilege, but if you knew Elvis and you knew the Colonel, you might learn that you'd have more fun hanging out through the day with Colonel Parker than Elvis. I know that's sacrilegious, but it's true.